Well, if you brought your Bibles or on your phone and you wish to follow along, you'll want to turn to John chapter 20. Leading up to Easter, we've been reading through John chapters 19 and 20. We're going to be in John 20 one more Sunday. Hey, the first half of John 20, if you were here last week, was the Easter resurrection story, right? And we celebrated Jesus walking out of the tomb. We were there with Mary, who saw the empty tomb first, and Peter and John, who ran there to see it themselves, and then the disciples who saw Jesus that night show up in the room with them, right? And we celebrated the resurrection of Jesus. But if you were here, you know that we touched on the next part of the story. What we learned was that when Jesus showed up to those disciples, Thomas was not there. Thomas didn't see Jesus risen from the dead. And so he said, you know what? I need to see it until I believe it. You know, I don't know about you. I grew up in the church, and I grew up referring to Thomas as Doubting Thomas. Right? That's how we knew him, Doubting Thomas. Poor guy, he kind of got a bad rap here, right? He did a lot of great. Thomas was a disciple for 3 years, followed Jesus everywhere he went, learned from him, and grew in knowledge of him, and was faithful to him. He had some great moments. Like, maybe you know this one. In John chapter 11, Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to go back to Bethany, which is right outside of Jerusalem. Well, just like the chapter before, just a moment before, the people in Jerusalem had come out and tried to stone Jesus. They were trying to kill him. And now Jesus is going to go right back to where they are. And all the disciples say to Jesus, hey, how about we don't go there? How about we stay away from Jerusalem? Because remember, they just tried to stone you? And Jesus says, no, we need to go. And they keep trying to convince him. And it's Thomas who says, let's all go together with him. And if he dies, I'm willing to die with him. Whoa! Maybe we should call him Courageous Thomas instead of Doubting Thomas. Maybe we should call him Devoted Thomas. Right? But instead we remember him for John chapter 20. Okay, so last week, before I read it, remember Jesus appeared in the room with the disciples the night that he rose, and he showed them that he's alive. Thomas wasn't there. Because remember how hard it is to believe if you don't see? Seeing is believing. Thomas didn't see. Let's read his story. Verse 24 through 29 of John chapter 20. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and unless I put my hand into his side, I will not believe. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands? And reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. And Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. I love this story. There's Doubting Thomas, right? Full of all his doubts and his wonderings. All week long, he's the one holdout, right, from the disciples. They all say, I believe, and Thomas is like, I haven't seen it. And then Jesus shows up. And Doubting Thomas believes, right? Jesus' words to him, stop doubting and believe. Jesus says, here, feel free to put your finger in my hands. Feel free to put your hand in my side. And it doesn't say that Thomas ever did. I don't think he had to. Because he saw and he believed. For some reason, this is not working. So I'm going to have Ludmilla, if you don't mind following along on the screen, and hopefully it will be clear when to change the next slide. So, stop doubting and believe. We need to talk about that word doubt a little bit today, okay? Because doubt is something that I think we misunderstand a lot, right? We judge Thomas for being a doubter. And yet, look at that definition of doubt. Doubt is defined as a feeling of uncertainty about the truth or reality of something. Okay, so doubt comes when you're not quite sure that something is really true. Did it really happen? Don't know. And doubt really is a powerful thing and can be used for good or bad, right? In today's world, when AI is getting so good and can change photographs, can create photographs of things that never happened that look so real, I think there's people who use that to instill doubt, to make you doubt that what happened really happened. And there's good reason to doubt, for you to go back and say, I need to double check this. I need to make sure I'm just not going to believe everything that I see, right? There's a lot of doubt out there. Let me ask you a question. With that definition of doubt, okay, uncertain about the future, what word would you say is the opposite of doubt? If you don't doubt, what's the opposite of doubt? Anybody want to guess?
Trust.
Trust is a good guess. Belief is a good guess.
Certainty.
Whoever just said certainty, I like Rachel, I remember your name, right? I think the opposite of doubt is certainty, right? Certainty is defined as something established as true or sure and unquestionable. And there's a lot of things we can be certain of, right? What's 2 plus 2? Well, maybe we aren't so certain about these things. How about 4, right? There's a little debate. If you were to debate that with me, I'd wonder a little bit, okay? That's certain. 2 plus 2 is 4. No argument. Have this football here. If I let go of it, what's going to happen? Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? Down. Gravity is pretty certain, isn't it? It takes it every time, right? There's things we can be very certain of. And Thomas, in this story that we just read, he goes from doubt, I'm really uncertain, I really don't believe, and he goes all the way to the other extreme, to absolute certainty, because he saw Jesus. And with Jesus standing right in front of him, with Jesus saying, look, here's the hole in the hand, here's the hole in the side, there's no more doubt left. There's no more uncertainty. He's certain because the proof is right there in front of him. What Thomas didn't need to have is he did not need to have faith. Sometimes you think the opposite of doubt is faith. Faith is something totally different. Let me give you the definition of faith. Faith is a belief that is not based on proof. Let me give you the Bible gives us the definition, right? The great Heroes of the Faith chapter of Hebrews 11 says this: faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is belief not based on proof. Let's use this again. All right, I got this football here. You didn't need to have any faith that gravity would take it down. Now, this time, Warren, I'm going to throw you this football. How many of you believe that this football will actually make it to Warren and he will catch it?
Well,
there's a lot of doubters here, Warren. There are a lot of You're right to doubt. There's a lot that could go wrong. I need to figure out exactly what gravity is going to do to this thing to get it over Barbara's head and not hit her in the head, right? And get down to Warren. I need to throw it right. Warren needs to be able to catch it right. And I have no idea exactly. Barbara might stick her hand up and purposely knock it down. It takes faith for you to believe that this football is actually going to get over there. Some of you have misplaced faith in us, right? You needed faith because you couldn't see it. There was no proof. There's no certainty that it would actually make it there, right? That's what faith is. And you know what? Doubt is a necessary partner with faith. You cannot have faith without also having doubt. They go together. They go together. So none of us here needs to feel guilty when you feel some doubts, when you have some doubts. None of you needs to feel bad, like, God's disappointed in me because I have these doubts. Doubt and faith go hand in hand. We all have them, and we all will have them until we see Jesus face to face ourselves. That's why, in this story, Jesus doesn't get upset with Thomas. He doesn't come into the room and say, Thomas, come on, get with the program here. Why? No, he goes right to Thomas, I'll give you what you need. I'm not upset about your doubts. And that's why God is not upset about your doubts. When you come to him and say, I'm just not so certain. He doesn't say, oh, come on. He says, let's talk. Okay? Doubts are normal. They're natural. It's very much okay for you and me to have our doubts. I know I have them. But what is very important to learn is what to do with them when you have them, when they come. How do you handle the doubts that come up in your mind and in your heart? Because like a lot of things in life, right, doubts can be both dangerous and be helpful, depending on how you handle them. That's true of a lot of things. My car is extremely helpful to me getting me where I want to be. It's also extremely dangerous if I don't handle it well. I could kill someone with my car. Every single knife in my kitchen. You know, I used it yesterday cooking, and I'm so thankful for sharp knives, and it's also very dangerous if I use it improperly, if I don't handle it well. Doubts can be good, can be helpful, and they can be dangerous depending on how we handle them. They're dangerous when we let our doubts get control of our thinking, when we let our doubts go unchecked, unexplained, unchallenged, and just let them begin to grow unquestioned in our hearts and in our minds, right? Doubts that go unchallenged or unexplored can take root, and those roots grow into little plants, and those plants begin to grow, and pretty soon your doubt is a full-grown tree, right? And it gets dangerous then when our doubts pull us away from God. When they pull us away from the truth about who Jesus truly is. And there's so many areas where the enemy wants to sow seeds of doubt in your mind and in my heart, and in hopes that you'll just let them grow, right? He wants you to have doubts about the resurrection that we celebrated last Sunday on Easter, right? People don't really rise from the dead. I've never seen it. I've never experienced it. So Jesus certainly couldn't have. It must all be a lie. He wants that little seed to grow in you. He wants you to have doubts about grace. Right? Really? There's nothing in life that's free, and you're telling me that salvation is a free gift? There's got to be something I have to do. there's got to be some goodness, good level that I need to reach before God will give me grace, right? He wants to sow those doubts that it's truly free or not. He wants to sow the seed of doubt about God's love for you. So many of us have struggled with that. Maybe because we didn't feel loved as children, or a parent, we struggled with that, or we don't feel that we're good enough. And now we're supposed to believe that God loves me unconditionally. And Satan wants to say, no, not really. You still need to measure up. Or one of his favorites, he wants us to have doubts about forgiveness. God tells us, my forgiveness is free and it's unlimited. And we say, no way. You mean there's no sin so big that it can't be forgiven? That's hard to believe. And it's hard to believe that this sin that I keep doing again, that there's no count. Like when I do it the 1,000th time, God will still forgive me 1,000 times? Can't be true. God says, yes, it is. Right? Or maybe Satan throws the seed of doubt that there's anything after this life. Is there really eternity? Again, I don't see it. So maybe there's nothing after this life, and I can just live how I want to be, and when it's done, it's done. He wants to grow that doubt in your heart and in your life. And my guess is all of us have friends or family members who have let those doubts grow. And those doubts have led them now far, far away from God. Right out of a relationship with him. Right? Doubts can be dangerous if you just let them grow. But by God's grace, each one of us is here today. By God's grace, we must have had a different experience with our doubts. Because doubts can be helpful. They can actually be helpful in growing our faith. Because doubts are really questions that demand answers. And when we're asking the questions and letting them lead us towards answers, then we're discovering who God is. Right? And those doubts become opportunities that prod us towards God. That prod us to move towards the truth of who he is. And they actually then help us to learn and help us to grow. One of my favorite quotes, I've used it here before, so you might recognize it, is from Frederick Buechner. And it sounds really cool in English. It probably doesn't sound nearly as cool in Spanish. So I'm sorry for those of you who are translating to Spanish. But he said this, he said, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. Ants in the pants. My mom used to use that phrase for me when I was a kid and I couldn't sit still. It's like you got ants in your pants, right? If ants are crawling in, I gotta move, I gotta go, right? Frederick Buechner saying, doubt does the same thing for your faith. If your faith is just kind of lazy, kind of falling asleep, the doubts come in and say, ooh, I gotta figure this out. Ooh, I wonder, I gotta ask these questions. I gotta discover this truth. I've gotta learn more. The ants in the pants that keep us awake and moving. They lead us to discover greater truths about God. I referred to Hebrews chapter 11, the great heroes of the faith chapter, where we got that definition about faith. Every single one of those heroes, and if you haven't read that chapter later, that's your homework for today. Read Hebrews chapter 11. You're going to find they list all these heroes of the faith, and they aren't heroes because they never doubted. Absolutely not. They're heroes because even though they doubted, they let those doubts move them forward in faith. They chose faith. Think about it. There's Noah. He's listed as one of the heroes, right? Noah, who's told to build an ark. That probably took years to build. Years of sunshine. as he's building a boat far away from water. And he heard all of his neighbors laughing at him. He heard all of his neighbors mocking him. And I'm sure he had these moments where he said, what am I doing? And you know what his answer was? I'm being obedient to God. He had the doubts, and he chose faith. And then in the list you have Abraham. Abraham, who had a great life, was all settled in. He was probably very wealthy, had a nice house, and God said, pack up everything you got, sell a whole bunch of it if you wish, and go. And Abraham said, okay, where are we going? And God said, I'm not telling you. Just go. You think he had some doubts? I think he did. I would have. And you know what Abraham said? He said, okay. Okay. I'm going to let these doubts prod me toward faith, towards trusting you more, God. Then you have Moses, who tells us his doubts. God tells to Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh and lead the people out of slavery in Egypt. And Moses says, I can't do that. I can't talk well. I can't lead well. I'm not your guy. And God said, how about you choose faith instead of doubt? And those doubts prodded him to choose faith. And God used Moses so powerfully. And the list goes on. The people of Israel, as they followed Moses, remember the moment where the Egyptians are chasing them and they're trapped at the Red Sea in front of them, and God parts the waters of the Red Sea and they walk through the sea with walls of water on each side? You think they had some doubts when they decided to walk through those walls? Can you promise me that water is not going to crash back down? No, I can't promise that. And you know what? Their doubts prodded them to trust God more. Say, I'll take that step because I trust God more than I'm going to let my doubts run me. The doubts pointed them towards God. This whole list, they're heroes of the faith. Not because they didn't doubt, but because in faith they chose to trust God even when they doubted. And you and I can choose to do the same. Right? We can learn from these heroes listed in Hebrews 11. Learn to choose to see our doubts as invitations. When they come into your heart, when they come into your mind, say, this is an invitation for me to discover more about God. This is an invitation for me to grow stronger in my faith. This is an invitation to me to find more answers about the truth. Let's go. Let's figure this out. Do you doubt God's love for you? Did you come here wondering if God really does love you? That's an invitation for you to explore what God says about who you are and how much he loves you. Do you doubt Jesus' resurrection? That he actually came back from the dead physically? That's an invitation for you to explore the evidence, and there's tons of evidence out there that will point you towards the truth. Do you doubt that God will continue to forgive you again and again and again? That's an invitation to explore God's character, his faithfulness and his love for you. Right? And God's given us opportunities, ways to find those answers, right? Good places to learn. Right? This community is a great place to discover those answers together, to dare to share your doubts. Because we just said everybody's got them, so you don't need to be ashamed of them, right? Especially in a small group like Justin's talking about. That's a great place, a safe place to say, I wonder about this. Can you help me? Right? This community is a great place to share doubts together, to challenge each other, to encourage each other, and then to learn together. Right? This book, the Bible, God reveals himself in his word. Read it, study it, look for the answers. Understand together. And we just prayed together, and in our prayer we talked about how God wants so desperately to be in a loving relationship with you, to have conversation with you. He wants to be that kind of friend to you. So in prayer, God says, let's talk about this together. And you know what? I'll let my Holy Spirit convince you of the truth and help convict you of what's true. I'll whisper my truth in your ear when you have doubts. I'll do that for you. So let your doubts be God's invitation to discover more. Doubting Thomas became believing Thomas because he went from doubt all the way to certainty. He believed because he saw. He didn't need to have faith anymore. He had certainty. You and I need to have faith because we are the ones that Jesus says at the end of that passage in verse 29. We're the ones who have to believe even though we haven't seen. When there's room for faith, that means there's also room for doubt. And I've often been jealous of Thomas and the disciples. Wouldn't it be great if I could just see the risen Jesus? I wonder that, why doesn't God just let everybody, okay, we got a 5-minute window where Jesus is going to be visible for everybody so that everybody can believe. Wouldn't that be, you know what Jesus says here in verse 29? He says to Thomas, yeah, you're blessed because you've seen me. But he says even more blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. You and I are those blessed ones. More than Thomas, who had certainty, we have faith, and there's a profound beauty in faith, in believing when there isn't certainty. Right? There's a joy that God gives in that faith journey, in the adventure of discovering, in the learning the lessons of trust and of truth. There's joy in the journey. Right? When I had this ball, and I asked you about when I let go, which way is it going to go? And you all said down, and I dropped it, and you know what? Nobody smiled, nobody laughed, nobody had any joy in that. When I threw this ball towards Warren and Barbara intercepted it, you all laughed. You all smiled. There was joy in the journey of uncertainty and faith. There's joy in the journey, God says. So you and I get to experience the blessing of faith. Doubts will be a necessary companion in that journey. Don't ignore them. Don't ignore them. Pay attention to them. Don't feel guilty about them. They're normal, they're natural. Pay attention, listen to them, and let them be your invitation into a deeper exploration of the truth of who Jesus Christ is and who God is. And let it be your invitation to a deeper search into his heart, into a deeper relationship with the risen Jesus, who absolutely loves you, even when you doubt it. Would you join me in prayer?